right, SpongeBob! We're not cavemen! We have technology!
Movies and TV shows are fun. We all spend a good chunk of time with entertainment. But what we tend to ignore is the method with which our favorite movies and TV shows end up in our hands. That method has changed over the years. Cable, streaming, DVD and VHS releases, there have been a lot of ways with which we could get entertainment into our grubby little hands. One of these methods was renting, and for the longest time, one giant reigned supreme over all in video rentals, a company you may or may not know very well. That company was none other than Blockbuster. This is the Blockbuster Experiment. Blockbuster's story starts with a young businessman named David Cook. David Cook was the CEO of a company called Cook Data Services, a company that was selling software services to the oil and gas industries. But in 1985, the company was struggling due to a lack of demand. The 33-year-old wanted to pursue a new venture. Back then, David's wife, Sandy Cook, was interested in the video rental industry, specifically in the idea of opening up a video rental franchise. David studied a potential video store franchise for her and determined that such a franchise could grow to 1,500 stores. David realized that this could become a huge industry. Cook also realized that his experience with computers and databases could also help him in such an endeavor. At the time, most video rental stores and franchises had a small selection of titles and hits that were stored behind the counter to prevent theft. These rentals were kept track of manually, which also limited the efficiency and speed of renting those titles out to customers. Cook's idea was to modernize the system by digitizing the system. Instead of keeping track of rentals manually, they would instead be kept track of in a digital database. Such a database would allow for not only a smooth experience whilst renting for the customer and the employees, but it would also allow the video store to display its titles like in a bookstore. All they needed to prevent theft were sensors placed in the rentals that would alert the employees if a rental was stolen. Cook's idea sounded simple, but at the time, it was genius. David Cook soon realized the potential of his idea, and he would go all in. He first sold his oil and gas software business to a group of investors. Then, he invested his money into a video chain called VideoWorks. But the video chain wouldn't allow him to decorate their interior in a blue and yellow scheme, so he sold his shares in the franchise and instead founded his own video store and named it Blockbuster Incorporated. Of course, Cook obviously didn't have the money to suddenly start opening up thousands of stores at once, so instead he took the standard franchising model and applied it to his business. The first Blockbuster store opened in the Medallion Shopping Center in Dallas, Texas, and immediately became a smashing success. Cook later stated, "The first night we were so mobbed, we had to lock the doors to prevent more people from coming in." The Cooks decided to open up 2 other stores, as well as building a $6 million distribution center in Garland, Texas to supply the Blockbuster stores. But the first 2 years of the business would be rough for David Cook and his company. Blockbuster tried to make an initial stock offer, but an article written by a financial columnist, which exposed Cook's history in the oil and gas industry and questioned his experience, changed their plans. And by the end of '86, Blockbuster had ran out of money and reported losses. But soon, Blockbuster had started entering smoother roads. 3 investors decided to buy into the company in 1987. But these weren't any random investors. No, these 3 used to be the head honchos of Waste Management, at the time the largest garbage disposal company in the world. And not only that, the company had been founded in 1968 and in the span of 2 decades had already become the biggest garbage disposal company in the world. If anyone was going to make Blockbuster work, it would be these 3 guys. David Cook soon gave up complete control of the company in a few months' time after a dispute broke out, and soon the 3 investors became the CEOs of Blockbuster. Afterwards, the company moved headquarters to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Drawing from their waste management past, they decided to focus on fast and quick growth. Using the Roy Crux tragedy, they franchised out a bunch of Blockbuster stores and started opening a store every 24 hours on average. They also grew by acquiring video stores that were dominant in their respective areas. This way, they grew even faster. Their growth was insane. For reference, in 1985, they had one store, and by the end of '87, they had 133 stores. To support these stores, 6 different regional offices and the distribution center in Dallas, Texas were open for the operation. By 1989, the company had become the largest video rental chain. They continued their practice of buying up further video rental chains and also bought back a lot of franchise stores. The company became one of the fastest growing firms in the world, and unsurprisingly, the investors were hooked and invested heavily into Blockbuster. But they would encounter roadblocks. Controversy erupted over the company's accounting practices, which would spread out the cost of buying assets over a longer period of time. The stock took a hit, but eventually it recovered. But the market in America had become saturated, so by 1989, Blockbuster decided to look outside its borders. Blockbuster entered multiple countries, including the UK, Japan, Australia, and Canada, and many more from 1989 to 1996. Blockbuster, at its peak, operated in 15 different countries. To say Blockbuster was growing fast is an understatement. Blockbuster had also branched out into other markets as well, most notably being music and video game rentals. The latter would end up landing them in a lawsuit with Nintendo, which they ended up winning after a judge ruled in favor of Blockbuster's video game rentals. Blockbuster was not showing signs of stopping anytime soon. That didn't mean, though, that they wouldn't be up for sale. And as it turns out, one company did have interest, and it was none other than Viacom. At the time, Viacom was in a bidding war against QVC Network to buy out Paramount, and Blockbuster had dumped a lot of money into Viacom to help them in the bidding war. So Viacom bought Blockbuster in the autumn of 1994. But the buyout of Blockbuster by Viacom would mark a turning point. The Viacom takeover was not very popular within Blockbuster shareholders, so much so that it took 9 months for the acquisition deal to finalize. Although the Viacom takeover did bring positives, the negatives were also a huge problem. The now long-standing CEO, Huizinga, left the company and was replaced by Stephen Berard. But he was CEO for only about 1.5 years. Former Walmart executive Bill Fields was next. He oversaw one of Blockbuster's most important events, their move from Fort Lauderdale, Florida to Dallas, Texas. The reason for the move was that this would place Blockbuster's headquarters closer to the distribution facility in Dallas. This was a significant event in the company's history, since many of the senior staff members who worked at Fort Lauderdale didn't move to Dallas. So, Blockbuster just took the few who agreed to move to Dallas and hired new employees for their Dallas headquarters. But Bill Fields didn't go with the rest of the employees to Dallas. So, he was replaced in '97 by former Taco Bell CEO John Antioco. This is when the company started to run into deep trouble. At the time, Warner Brothers wanted to do business with Blockbuster. They wanted to give Blockbuster exclusive rights to new DVD releases in exchange for 40% of revenue from rentals, the same deal that had already been put in place for VHS rentals. But Blockbuster didn't sign the deal, which ended up in dire consequences. Warner Brothers decided to lower their DVD's wholesale price. Retailers like Walmart decided to take the opportunity and started selling those DVDs in their stores for a price that was barely above the cost of renting. This snowballed into more studios copying Warner Brothers' tactic. Blockbuster's main business model was starting to look outdated. In what may have been a response to this development, Blockbuster created their own production studio called DEJ Productions in 1998 and bought out 225 films to rent them out to customers. But despite these setbacks, Blockbuster also found some success. Aunt Yoko had made the company $465 million through a successful IPO offering. But Aunt Yoko would soon have to make an important decision. At the turn of the millennium, a specific event would take place that would decide the fate of the company. In 2000, Netflix was just a struggling startup trying to stay alive after the dot-com crash. They wanted to sell the company so that Netflix got cash injection. So they called up the Blockbuster executives to enter discussions. They met up at Blockbuster's headquarters in Dallas, but the talks ended up going horribly bad. Although Netflix executives were envisioning a company where they ran the online part and Blockbuster executives ran the retail stores, Blockbuster's executives were not confident in Netflix's business model and thought the business wouldn't be able to make any money. At one point, when an advisor of Blockbuster asked for the price, Mr. Hastings, chairman of Netflix, offered the struggling company for $50 million. Blockbuster's executives were not impressed, and in fact, struggled not to laugh. Netflix executives went home angry and disappointed. But even knowing now what became of Blockbuster and Netflix, there was a good reason why Blockbuster didn't take the bait. The simple truth was that Netflix was a small startup struggling to survive, while Blockbuster was an established giant, leading its industry with thousands of stores and employees. And Blockbuster had already struck up a deal with Enron to make an online service, so it seemed to be a logical decision to not buy the company. This would later turn out to be a horrible decision, but for now they were fine. But the Enron partnership fell through due to fears over Blockbuster not being able to provide enough movies. Soon after, Enron collapsed. Despite their attempts at entering the digital age, Blockbuster was still opening new stores. They thought that the digital age would take a while to start biting into their business, and the dot-com crash merely reinforced that idea. But Blockbuster's attempts at innovating still didn't stop. Blockbuster messed around more by buying DVD Central Rental, an online DVD rental company that would set the framework for Blockbuster Online. In 2004, Blockbuster had reached their peak. They had close to 9,000 stores worldwide, which was about the same amount of Burger King locations at the time. From here on out, it was all but a slow and painful decline. It all started with Viacom spinning off Blockbuster in October 2004 due to concerns over Blockbuster's declining revenues and long-term future. Their bottom line was being threatened by cheap DVDs flooding the market, services like Netflix's DVD by mail service, and emerging technologies like streaming. After a decade, Blockbuster was once again on their own, and things weren't exactly going well. After they were spun off, they tried to take over a major competitor called Hollywood Video in December of that same year. But due to opposition from the Federal Trade Commission, they withdrew their offer by March 2005. In January 2005, Blockbuster debuted their most well-known and most controversial ad campaign, the No Late Fees campaign. The campaign became well-known due to the claim that they had removed late fees, a huge part of their core business model. But it was also controversial because of its false advertising. As it turns out, they hadn't completely removed late fees. Rather, they had simply tweaked their late fees policy so that customers who failed to return their rentals after 8 days would be charged the full price of the rental unless they returned it for a fee. This simple, misleading advertising practice would get them in lawsuits with 47 states. Blockbuster settled these lawsuits by paying the legal fees of the 47 states, as well as refunding customers who were either charged the restocking fee or paid the full price of the rented titles, and promised to better explain their policy, establishing an information center as well. After this conundrum, they decided to launch a billion-dollar campaign called Total Access in November 2006 that gave customers a new movie for free if they returned an online rented DVD to a Blockbuster store. This scheme worked wonders as Blockbuster's online service quickly grew. But there was a caveat. Each free rental cost the company $2, which meant that the company was burning money. Despite this, it was more than enough to get Netflix to panic and try to broker a deal with Blockbuster, where Netflix would sell off their online services and where Netflix rented titles could be returned to Blockbuster stores. But even though this would have been a good deal and would eliminate Netflix as a competitor to Blockbuster, Carl Icahn, who had gotten himself a position on Blockbuster's board 2 years prior, wasn't on board with what he thought was wasting more money than necessary, considering that the Total Access program was already losing Blockbuster a ton of money. So, Antioco was kicked out in July 2007, and former president of 7-Eleven, James Key, replaced him as the new CEO of Blockbuster. James Keyes, who shared the same concerns as Carl Icahn, decided to raise the price of Blockbuster subscriptions, as well as ending the free rental scheme. Of course, this led to Total Access losing many subscribers immediately. To add to Blockbuster's growing issues, in January 2007, Netflix launched their streaming service, which allowed users to download movies and TV shows over the internet. This one product would soon single-handedly change Blockbuster's fate in the coming years. But for now, Blockbuster lived. In August 2007, a month after James Keyes was crowned CEO, Blockbuster decided to buy out MovieLink, which was an on-demand service that was created in 2002 as a joint venture between MGM, Paramount, Sony Pictures, Warner Bros., and Universal. MovieLink was a service that allowed you to buy and download from a selection of 6,000 films. But despite the fact that Blockbuster spent a reported $6.6 million on the business, the online service soon closed down, presumably at the end of 2008. In April 2008, Blockbuster entered negotiations with consumer electronics retailer Circuit City for a possible buyout. But most analysts weren't convinced and questioned what benefits both companies would reap in a merger. Blockbuster subsequently backed out of the deal a few months later, blaming market conditions as well as a disappointing review of Circuit City's financial books. By 2010, Blockbuster had hit the hard road. At the start of the year, they had 5,220 stores worldwide, which was 3,780 stores less from their peak in 2004. By the next year, this number fell to around 4,313 stores. PricewaterhouseCoopers, Blockbuster's independent registered accounting firm, released their audit opinion, disclosing doubt about the company's ability to continue their going concern. More bad news came when Blockbuster issued a bankruptcy warning. Carl Icahn, who at one point was the company's largest shareholder, ditched the company in April, and the firm was delisted from the New York Stock Exchange in July after they failed to meet listing requirements, falling below the $1 a share line. Blockbuster's competitors also started to go bankrupt because the general business model had become outdated in the wake of Netflix and Hulu, and soon it wouldn't be long before Blockbuster was next. In September 2011, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy after many losses, fierce competition, and $1 billion in debt. Well, problem was that they didn't completely meet the Chapter 11 requirements because they couldn't meet their financial obligations. Blockbuster was on the verge of Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which would effectively end the company. Due to this, Blockbuster put itself up for sale in February 2011 for $300 million or more, with the winner of the auction taking on Blockbuster's debt as well. There were initial offerings from different companies, but in the end, Dish Network bid and won the auction to buy Blockbuster. Due to the buyout, Blockbuster had gotten a bit more time to survive, but not a whole lot of time. With the buyout came a new CEO by the name of Michael Kelly, who wanted to reinvent Blockbuster. In September 2011, Dish and Blockbuster unveiled their new streaming service called Blockbuster Movie Pass that included a streaming service as well as movies and games by mail service. But because this service was only available to Dish customers and with a $10 per month bill on top of that, led to the end of the streaming service soon afterwards. By October 2012, Dish Network had announced that Blockbuster would not be turned into a Netflix rival, essentially killing the hope for an online Blockbuster service. And soon, Blockbuster as a corporate entity would cease to exist, with Dish closing all remaining 300 corporate-owned stores between November 2013 and January 2014, with only 51 franchise Blockbusters remaining. Blockbuster as a company was now dead. Dish Network continued to retain the rights to Blockbuster, but not much was done with it. Only the video streaming services, Blockbuster On Demand and Blockbuster at Home, remained until 2015, when they were replaced by Dish Movie Pack. With Blockbuster gone for the most part, Michael Kelly retired in May 2015. Franchise Blockbusters would continue operating for a while, but many gradually closed down over the years. By August 2018, all Blockbuster stores had closed, except for one last Blockbuster store in Bend, Oregon. Today, it's the only Blockbuster that survived. So, what went wrong? How could such a behemoth go from a towering count of 9,000 retail stores to only one in a matter of 14 years? Well, for one, I'd say Blockbuster's fall from grace can be attributed largely to the poor management and infighting within the company. There's a narrative with the Blockbuster story that old and stupid executives didn't see the threat that Netflix and other industry players posed. But in truth, even as far back as in the mid-90s, Blockbuster's management foresaw the threat that streaming posed on their business model, and even tried to stay ahead of the curve with their own attempts at streaming. But due to complacent management and infighting within the company, these attempts didn't materialize into anything substantial. As a result, Netflix managed to beat Blockbuster to the finish line, resulting in the swift collapse of the company. Today, the remnants of the empire is a tiny little store in Bend, Oregon, the last of its kind. While for the present, this store will remain, it may only be a matter of time until it rents out its last movie.